Friday in Simpsonville, South Carolina, and actually making this a day early, but we'll post it on Friday. Did a series in our church in Florida on the apostles, the original 12 men, and you got to really appreciate these guys because Jesus entrusted his future ministry on earth to these 12 men to spread the good news and to grow the church. You'll find a list of the apostles in 4 places: Matthew 10, Mark 3, Luke 6, and Acts 1. In, of course, the Acts, you'll find the replacement for Judas. And we sometimes add as an apostle, as somebody who was personally called by Jesus. We sometimes list Paul as an apostle because of his personal calling on the Damascus Road and his ministry given to him in Damascus. Today I want to look at Philip. His name means lover of horses. I don't know if he did or not. Nevertheless, he shouldn't be confused with the deacon Philip, who you'll find in Acts chapter 6-5, I believe it is. But in any case, there's a deacon named Philip. You don't want to confuse the two. Nevertheless, these apostles, many of them, there's very little written about them. Philip's name as Philip the Apostle only appears 15 times in the entire New Testament, and probably the majority of those references are in John. And so we have a clear tracking of Philip. In John 1:43, we have his calling. Now, what's interesting about his calling is it says, Jesus found Philip. Isn't that interesting? Jesus found Philip. Not Philip found Jesus, but Jesus went looking for Philip. I think that's particularly interesting because that means that when he called me to ministry, he came looking for me. And when he called you to be one of his children, he came looking for you. I think it's particularly interesting that he found Philip. In chapter 1, verse 44, we find that Philip was from Bethsaida, as were also Andrew and Peter. In John 1:45, we find that he was one that Philip went in and went to Nathanael and said, "We've found the one that Moses and the prophets spoke of." That's an incredible testimony. Philip, very soon after Jesus found him, was so convinced that Jesus was the Messiah, the one that Moses and the prophets had talked about, that he went and told Nathanael about him. We found him. We found the one that the Old Testament prophets talked about. That's really a great faith and a great belief. In John chapter 1, verse 45, we find that he had researched and knew that all of the telltale signs of Moses and the prophets were fulfilled in Jesus. John chapter 6, verse 5. There's a challenging or a testing of Philip. Jesus was getting ready to feed the multitudes, and he went to Philip. Philip was from around the parts where they were at that particular time of his ministry, and he said to Philip, "Where will we find enough bread to feed these?" Now, it clearly tells us in the following verse that Jesus already knew how he was going to feed these, but he was testing Philip. I want you to see, Philip had good math sense, but still didn't understand Lord sense. Let me explain that. Philip did some fast math in his head, and he said 200 denarii would not feed this group. Now, in today's dollars, that would be $12,000. And so he was basically saying, hey, it would take a lot of money, even if we found a place that had that much bread, it would take a lot of money, which we don't have. So he was pretty good at math, but he didn't understand who Jesus was fully yet. Now, that's really interesting, fully yet. I think all of us start to firm up all that we believe about Jesus. The longer that we're Christians and the more we study him, the more we realize that he's limitless. Nevertheless, Philip didn't pass the test about the feeding, but he was good at math, and certainly we can do lots of speculation about what and when Philip fully understood all that Jesus could do. We do know about Philip's compassion and his teamwork in John chapter 12, verse 20. We find that a Greek came to Philip and wanted to see Jesus. Philip immediately went to Andrew, and the two of them went to Jesus with this Greek. Teamwork, evangelism, compassion for those that want to find Jesus. In John 14:8, we find a crash. Philip is being tested again, and he said, if we could just see the Father, if you just show us the Father. And Jesus had to give him a mild rebuke and say, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. So we've seen his calling. We've seen the challenge and the testing the first time. We've seen the compassion. And we saw the crash, show us the Father. But in Acts chapter 8, verse 5, and Acts chapter 8, verse 26, we find out what a fine witness and evangelist Philip was. He was out sharing the gospel. We find him in 8:26 of the book of Acts, running alongside of the Ethiopian eunuch's chariot and sharing the gospel. And we show that he was active in the building of the New Testament church. Interesting, isn't it? We all are in a growing mode. If we really want to serve him, we can't be satisfied. We have to continue to draw more and more closely to him, to learn more and more about him, and we'll trust him more and more, and our witness will be more and more brazen, and we'll certainly continue to win souls for Christ as our faith grows and as we draw closer to him. Philip, one of the disciples, only mentioned 15 times in the Gospels, and yet every place you touch, you find he's a man of faith, a man growing in that faith, a man who is willing to serve, a man who is willing to sacrifice. Yes, we could all learn a lot from Philip, even though we hardly ever hear about him in any sermons. He's a man after God's own heart. That's your thought for the day. God bless you and have a great day.